Welcome to Something You Can Do. This is a podcast for people who are hungry for action steps. This podcast is different. Each episode, we welcome a co-host or guest to tell us something you can do. I'm your host, KJ Kozak, and this podcast combines my three favorite things: helping people get stuff done, building community, and talking to hear my own voice. And I look forward to sharing today's topic, Something You Can Do, with a very special guest, my sister, Maggie. So, Maggie, let me ask you, what is something you can do?
Something that you can do is you can help your sister start a podcast, which is something I am doing today on this podcast with you, my sister.
Wow, what a lovely and relevant thing that you can do. So tell me, Maggie, why is this something you can do?
Well, thank you for asking that. There are a lot of reasons why this is something you can do. There are so many of them. I've actually narrowed it down to six reasons why you, listening at home, should help your sister start a podcast. This is directed at the listener, not at anyone in this particular podcast. Reason number one is because you have just all of this sound equipment lying around, and you have no use for it at all. You have this, and it's just gathering dust, and your sister wants to start a podcast, and you don't know much about podcasting, but you do know that you have the audio equipment, and that is the first step, right? So you want to put that to good use. And so one of the easiest, most straightforward ways to do that, especially if you have a sister who wants to start a podcast, is to dust off that recording equipment, put it to good use, and record that podcast with your sister. And I think that's a great first reason.
Absolutely.
The second reason to help your sister start a podcast is because reason number one was a big, fat, stinky lie. You have so many uses for that sound equipment. You have daydreams about your uses for that sound equipment. As a wannabe amateur DIY musician, you are constantly thinking about the fact that you have all this sound equipment, and what you lack is the fundamental ingenuity and know-how to make any sound come out of that sound equipment, which is why I am here talking to you on my computer microphone. But despite that, you still want to feel included and feel like you have a reason for being a guest on this podcast, despite not being much of a podcast person. So, you'll start out with the audio equipment thing and then pull that away. But that's your second reason, because, you want to feel included despite not having working audio equipment.
Now, can I ask you, you mentioned
Yes.
that you're not much of a podcast person.
Correct.
Now, that's a bold move to come onto my podcast and say that you're not much of a podcast person.
Well, I mean, there's a difference between respecting the craft and consuming it yourself. Occasionally, if there's a podcast on a topic that I am personally really attuned to, like I've listened to a podcast dissecting Joanna Newsom lyrics, I occasionally I may have toyed around with an actual play podcast or two, but in general, when I'm the audio that I consume, I'm a music person. If I'm listening to talking, it's usually an audiobook or people that I already have some sort of connection to listening to them talk. And it's hard to get a foot into the door when there's this big, bustling community of these established personalities. And I have a hard time establishing that connection. But here, I have a pretty established rapport with this podcast host. I can talk to this podcast host for hours. Probably will not in this particular instance, but, could. So, you know.
Now, what would you say to listeners that don't have that connection with me? Like, that maybe aren't my sister?
I would say to give us a chance, to give my sister a chance. And hopefully you've clicked on this podcast because you like podcasts. And I would also say that, we're going to edit this out, right? This long pause.
What would you say hooks you about this podcast?
Well, the rotating, topic, rotating guests, I think is a good grab, because if there's a topic you're not so into, you'll find another one that you are. And if you really connect with that one, you'll be like, oh, I wonder what she has to say about something else. And I know you. I know that you have lots of opinions on a lot of things and are very articulate about those opinions about a lot of things. And you're also a very good conversationalist. You have let me ramble on about this for however long. And I'm sure if I go off the rails, you'll be able to steer me in a good direction. And I'd say for listeners to just put their trust in this very capable host.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure on me, to be perfectly honest. I appreciate your vote of confidence in me.
I'm very confident in you. Should I get back to my reasons? Because I have another reason.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. What is your next reason?
So reason number 3 to help your sister start a podcast, because it is Pride Month, and this is the one thing the cops can't ruin. Reason number 4, because you really like to support. Reason number 4 is because you love the people in your life, and you love to support the people in your life in their personal and professional endeavors in whatever big or small way you can. Parentheses, preferably small. But, big or small, depends on the circumstance. Reason number 5 why I think you should help your sister start a podcast is because it is a great excuse to do bits.
That's true.
You listening at home love doing bits. And, if you've got a sister that you do a lot of good bits with, well, a podcast is just a long-form excuse to do those bits.
Now, for the listeners at home, can you explain what a bit is?
A bit is an extended improvisational exercise in which you say a lot of silly things with another person and keep it going as long as you can. That's how I understand it.
I think that's a great definition. I would think of it as if an improv sketch and an inside joke had a baby.
Yo, absolutely.
That's yes. I would say that's a bit.
It's an inside joke that others can be let into.
Yes. Beautiful. As Michael Scott said, I love inside jokes. I'd love to be part of one someday.
Absolutely. And a bit, what is a bit if not an inside joke that we can all be a part of, if only by listening to other people do it?
Truly beautiful. That is beautiful. Are there more reasons?
There's one more reason.
Okay.
There is a final reason number 6. What else are you going to do on your day off? Huh? You've watched all of the Game Changer episodes multiple times. You're halfway through your 4th playthrough of Metroid Dread. What else are you going to do? Mm-hmm. You might as well get out of your comfort zone and take part of a medium of entertainment that you don't typically consume, because it is helpful to others and because it's something new to do, And this is something you should do podcast.
Actually, it's something you can do.
Something you can do, yeah. Right, of course. This is something you can do, and it's something you can do. And you know, you've never done it before, except for the one time about a month ago when we did a rehearsal of this podcast. And, you know, all those other things that you could do on your day off, you've done many times. So this is something new. And I have enjoyed this, even if it has mostly just been me rambling and extending this bit as long as I can. It's been enjoyable.
I'm so glad to hear that. I mean, what is a podcast if not just talking to hear your own voice, which is why I started this podcast in the first place.
Of course.
Which is funny because I actually hate listening to myself talk. So this is more about the part where I'm talking and not listening and less about like listening back to it. So.
Right. I myself will probably not listen to this episode. I mean, I might, but I find my own voice absolutely mortifying unless I am actively speaking.
Mm-hmm. So this is a gift to you, the listeners, that we're giving selflessly.
Of course.
So, Maggie, you gave 6 extremely compelling reasons why you should help your sister with her podcast by being a guest on one of the first episodes.
Yes.
Can you walk us through some steps? How do you do this thing?
How do I do this thing? I
Or how
personally...
could one?
Yeah. So, first you need to have a sister who wants to start a podcast. I mean, that's you know...
That's an important part.
That's the foundation of it. The second step is you need to hope that, rely on the fact that at some point she's going to say, hey, I want to start a podcast. Can you please be on it? And first you say, yeah, sure, of course. Then you realize, oh, she's serious about this.
Yeah.
And then the third step is you say, okay, well, let me get all this sound equipment working. And then the fourth step is you can't get it to work because of that fundamental lack of ingenuity that we talked about earlier. So you wing it, and you also wing the topic because you're inherently a little bit uncomfortable about the fact that your sister is very active in the community and in, has been active in local politics and stuff, and also has a PhD, and you are a grocery produce clerk who mainly rewatches Game Changer, and whose most notable thing she's done is sing into a can, which is very fun and notable, but, so when you rack your brain through all of these topics, you decide the best thing you can do, the most complimentary way you can serve this podcast is by starting it off with an extended bit, because that's something that you can stretch out.
Now, I'm gonna interject here, because you are selling yourself short by a lot.
Fair.
Like, I understand living in the shadow of my footsteps, I'm sure is very intimidating. I appreciate that you brought up that I have a PhD, so I don't have to. Very, very kind of you. But also, you mentioned singing into a can. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about the incredible experiences that you've had as a vocal performer?
Yes. Okay. So that is my one minor claim to fame, is that I have recorded vocals on a few albums by the musician Paul Shapira, who is a wonderful, incredible musician in person, who has recorded and composed and recorded an ongoing series of concept albums since 2012 with the Dolls of New Albion. I stumbled upon a casting call that he made, and wound up working with him on a few albums and a live show, which was an incredibly fulfilling creative experience, and, the most fulfilling creative experience of my life thus far, and is why I have all this recording equipment that I fundamentally cannot get to work.
Yeah, you're not just a goober at home with a nice microphone. You're a goober who's an incredibly talented vocalist and singer who has high quality audio equipment because she's been performing as a very popular character in a sort of, cult fandom. So let's get that straight.
Yeah, I will admit I undersell myself sometimes. It's
now,
the anxiety.
Also, you said you're just a grocery clerk. Now, what is the produce code for scallions?
The produce code for scallions is you always start with scallions, and scallions is one of the only ones that actually has a barcode. But recently, what I've realized is that the organic scallions have a barcode. The non-organic scallions, you do need to punch in the produce code, and it is 4068.
What about bananas?
Bananas is 4011. Everyone knows that.
What about onions?
Onions! Well, red is 4082. Vidalia is 4159. Sweet is 4166. White is 4665, yellow is 4663, and shallots are 4662.
Wow, that was beautiful. First of all, listeners, this was about 4 examples of bits, because first we had a callback to Regis Philbin's cameo on How I Met Your Mother.
Yes, of course.
And also, this is an incredible bit that Maggie and I love, that I love to subject Maggie to, which is quizzing her on produce codes.
Because, I mean, all right. So we mentioned I work as a produce clerk. This is after about a year of working in the self-checkout section, where 90% of the job is people scan the barcode on asparagus. It immediately calls me over because you don't scan the asparagus, you weigh it. I punch in the numbers 4080. They say, wow, you knew that right off the top of my head. And I have to not say, of course, lady, it's my job.
Right. It reminds me of when I worked at the library and I had memorized a lot of the Dewey Decimal Codes for things because I was putting the books away. So if I remember correctly, it was like 636 point something was horses, and it like seems very impressive, except for when like that's what 80% of your brain space is going to, is like remembering those things.
Yeah.
Totally.
I don't think about it anymore. I look at asparagus and I don't think asparagus, I think 4080. I look at a bag of cherries, I think 4045, and then I think, oh shit, they're about to ask me to take it off because they don't know how much cherries cost.
So the thing is that that's a very relatable experience, that you get some cherries, you're like, this is fantastic. You go to weigh the cherries, that it feels like really this is not a lot of cherries, and then it's like, oh, that's like $20 worth of cherries.
Right. But, and again, this is not a universal experience, this is just speaking to the one grocery store where I work. But I did notice when stocking the cherries yesterday that there's a scale right next to where the cherries are, and the sign for the cherries, very, very in big text, has the /pound. So, you have every opportunity to check how much your cherries are going to cost before you take them through self-scan, and then scan the barcode, and then make me come over to scan my card to punch them in, and then make me come back again to void them out because you didn't know how much they cost. Now, obviously, there's a chicken and egg. The grocery stores are intentionally misleading because they want you to not think about how much they cost and then just buy them anyway. But for the grocery store cop, it's not the best system, because then they have to call 911 to get me over, to take it over. And listen, they don't give me a badge. Like, why are you making me be a cop?
It's a fair question. I feel like this would be a wonderful topic for a future episode. Something you can do is optimize your self-check experience. I feel like you would be a wonderful guest for that
I could
topic.
Absolutely. I have so many pointers. Now, again, it's not universal, because I have a lot of people who come in and they'll scan the little sticker on the pear, and it'll call me over and they'll be like, what's wrong? I just scanned it. And I'll say, well, you can't scan it. And they'll go, but at Walmart. And I'll say, but you're not at Walmart.
Oh, no.
But So, while every store has their own quirks, I have so many people being like, where's the hand scanner? I'm like, we don't have any. They'll be like, but at Market Basket, I'll be like, but go to Market Basket. That being said, I do have a lot of streamlining tips that can work as a universal thing that I'm sure you'll have me on to talk about later.
Oh, 1,000%. Because, of course, going back to this week's topic, something you can do is be on your sister's podcast.
Right.
And so you walked us through sort of like, getting the equipment together, the sister that keeps asking you, will you be on my podcast? Will you be on my podcast? Will you be on my podcast?
Right.
Were there any other steps that we didn't get to in this process of being on your sister's podcast?
Yeah. Being medicated is a big one because when we recorded this, the sort of demo for this, I was not in a good mood, nor did I have the proper mental capacity to extend the bit as long as I could. So make sure that you are up to date and regularly taking any sort of anti-anxiety or antidepressants or just regular, make sure you're medicated. No one wants an unmedicated podcast guest.
I feel like that would be a really good teaser clip for this episode. No one wants an unmedicated podcast guest.
Nobody does.
It makes for a very different experience for sure.
Absolutely.
Now,
I feel like I want to.
There's a very important question here.
Yeah.
Of course, not all of the things you can do are things that you can do or would want to do or be able to do. But let's say that we have listeners out there that don't have a sister with a podcast. What would you say to them?
I would say that all of this has mainly been allegorical for helping the people in your life, for, putting aside your ego for a second and putting aside all of your hang-ups about yourself and, what you want to be doing, what you could be doing, and just make the lemonade for the person in your life with your own lemons, and maybe you'll get to share it.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I would say just if there's someone in your life, not necessarily a sister, who has a project, not necessarily a podcast, that they need your help with, it doesn't matter if, if they want to write a comic and that's not your thing, but you have the writing experience and you have the know-how, put it aside and help them out. And you don't have to be with them on every step of the way, but they need you to get it off the ground. So do that. You may not have functioning recording equipment or recording equipment that you know how to get to function. But what you do have is a strong sense of respect and affection and a want for this person to succeed. And so put aside your inhibitions and help the people in your life. That's what you can do. And you can also do a lot of bits with them.
Yes, definitely. I love this message of finding ways to help people. And I think also this message of when people are kind of not leaving you alone about something, and not in a boundary pushing way, but in that way of they're not going to go away until I maybe help them with this thing that I know that I'm going to enjoy or that'll be useful or whatever.
Keep hitting the snooze button, but the alarm's not going to turn off unless you wake up.
Wow, that got really deep. Incredible. Do you have any other examples of how you could kind of help the person in your life with the thing that they're trying to get off the ground?
No.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, this has been. I'm just kidding.
No. Yeah, enough. Yeah, sorry, my mind's drawing a blank. Is that also something we can edit around?
Yeah, of course. There's the last time you talked about like these really nice things of like I don't even remember. Well, that's a bummer.
Sorry. I don't know that I watched back our last episode because I don't like my faults.
Yeah, that's fine. That's relatable and fair. Okay, so we've talked about the why, we've talked about some how, we've talked about some other opportunities for if you don't have a sister with a podcast, you know, that this is more about supporting the people in your life and less about literally getting on a podcast. Are there any other nuggets of wisdom that you would like to share with our devoted listener base of probably my mom? Do you think we can get Libby to listen to this?
Oh, absolutely.
All right, shout out to Libby. She's our mom. And any other nuggets of wisdom for our listeners?
I would say just keep going at your creative endeavors, even if, like, this I am considering to be one of my creative endeavors. Even if it is not in a lane that you normally think of, it will keep you moving towards your goal. Like, I know being here with you and talking to you about this and just being active, making content, I hate that word, you know, and the idea of being back on this podcast and doing more episodes with you is motivating me to do more creative things in my chosen creative lanes of writing and music and that sort of stuff. So I would just basically say, take the opportunities that you are given, even the ones that you're not, you know, that you don't think are well tailored to you, because you never know. You never know where your skills lie until you try them.
Yeah.
I was talking about Dropout earlier. Allie Beardsley had never played D&D before the first season of D20, and now their job is to play D&D. So, you know,
that's why their first character has like a -3 to I don't remember which it is, but
I think it's acrobatics, because they keep tripping over the tables.
Right, I thought it was like Dex or something. Right.
Yeah, you just, if you're a creative person, take the creative opportunities that come your way and try and make the most out of it. You never know what will come of it. That's my nugget of wisdom. And even if you're not a creative person, it's always good to be creative in your life.
I feel like that's another thing that you can do, is find some opportunities for creativity. Do you have any suggestions as like a mini subset here of something you could do?
I mean, yes, I do.
Thank you. And this has been see, listeners, this is a great example of a bit.
Yeah, I personally, false starts. I write a lot. I have a lot of different notebooks that I have for different purposes, and one of them particularly is just an ideas book that I just, whenever I have an idea of like, oh, that would be something silly, you know, it goes in there. And if I am ever in a rut, I'll open that up and be like, oh, that's an idea I had that I forgot about. Let me write a story about that. Let me draw a picture of that. Let me, you know, write a song about that. So yeah, I like to keep a little journal just for, you know, silly creative things that could potentially be.
I love that idea. That feels very much like the sort of like, you know, napkin by the bedside table or whatever, having a space to just kind of jot things down.
Yeah.
Do you ever wake up in the middle of the night, like needing to write something down?
I do. I mean, I have talked to you a few times about a story idea I've had about a hedgehog witch. And that was like a 3 a.m. thought where like I was lying down just sort of thought rambling different story ideas, and I was like, hedgehog, tiny witch hat, she's the witch of the woods, and wrote it down and just knocked back out.
Wow, honestly, I feel like that is the best case scenario for waking up with an idea in the middle of the night.
Yeah. Hedgehog
so
with
good.
a little witch hat. The story writes itself.
It really does. TM, patent pending. Nobody steal that.
Nobody. That's mine.
Maggie, you have to write this story really quickly so
Absolutely.
that you can, retain your hold on this idea.
Of course.
With our huge listener base of our mom.
Libby.
Well, I don't know. Honestly, Libby loves writing songs and children's stories, so you gotta watch out for her.
Yeah, I do. She better... Libby, don't snag my hedgehog with a little tiny witch hat idea. That's mine.
I can hear her saying, I don't want to write about a hedgehog with a little tiny witch hat.
Yeah. That's something she would say.
Thank you so much for coming on for a second time. The first time is lost to the archives. But I really appreciate your coming on here and sharing so many things about how you can be on your sister's podcast, but also about produce codes and a little preview of self-check etiquette, being creative, some tips for kind of nurturing that creativity. And I really look forward to having you on this podcast again to dive a little bit deeper into some of these things that you can do.
Of course. I can't wait to be back here again and do something that's less of a bit, but still have bits.
I feel like whenever the two of us talk, it's all one extended improv exercise, to be honest. So I assume that's just what having a sister is.
Oh, for sure. And that's also what having a podcast is, I feel.
Yeah, no, maybe I should add that to the intro. I have a podcast because I just want one extended inside joke that I can share with the world.
Of course.
That's really what this is.
Yeah.
Also, we have another sister, so we'll have to have her on sometime.
Oh, she'll be on
because that's a whole other dynamic of bits and jokes and wisdom. So
absolutely.
Incredible. Well, this has been Something You Can Do podcast. We hope that you've enjoyed learning about something you can do, helping your sister start her podcast. We'll see you next time with another thing that you can do.